Hi, my name's Kevin Alschuler, and I'm a psychologist in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Washington in Seattle. I'm here today to talk about sport and what sport does for us to help make our lives more fulfilling and what we miss when sport goes away, such as what we're experiencing during the current pandemic. You see here my phrase, the ultimate bucket filler, and we'll talk a lot today about what that means. The goal of this talk is to help you understand why sport is so important to us and why we miss it so much when it is missing, right? When it goes away. We're going to talk about three main areas. We're going to talk about a concept called values, which is going to help you understand the second point, which is how we achieve our values or reach our values through sport. Then we're going to take a little bit of a turn and talk about how we can use sport to promote resilience. A lot of times we think about resilience as something we need to perform well in sport, but here we can use sport to help promote our own resilience as we go through challenges such as the current pandemic. Let's start by talking about values. And in this discussion, we're actually starting from outside of sport. So values are the desired qualities of your behavior. It's the way we want to be in the world, to give life its greatest meaning. Now, some people feel like when we're talking about values, we must be talking about goals, or we must be talking about what you do. But values aren't what you do. Values, in a lot of ways, are why you like doing the things that you do. We choose our activities when things are going well based on how fulfilling they are for our personal values. So what are these values? Well, they're not goals, they're not rules, they're not other people's behaviors, but they're things like this very long list, okay? Here's a number of words that can describe values. Things like being accountable, being focused, making a difference, doing something that's strategic or that demonstrates your strength. There are lots of ways to go about life and meet values that you might have. But like we're going to talk about today, a lot of the ways that we do that can be met through sport. And that's why we like sports. And that's why a lot of us are athletes. So let's start here. Let's think about your values as if they're buckets. And the fuller each values bucket is, the better we feel. So you see here, the full bucket is better than the empty bucket. Our lives, though, have many buckets. And often they're not all full. Some are more full than others. But the more buckets we have that are more full, the better we feel. So you see here on the left, more full buckets is better than on the right, the fewer full buckets. But what makes us into a good bucket filler? Well, there's a lot of things, but there's a couple I want to highlight here. The first is to be a good bucket filler, you have to understand your buckets. You have to understand that the activities we like are often the activities that fulfill our values. We have to understand what those buckets are made of and how we go about filling them and how we keep them full, because each has its own or different properties. A second thing that I think is relevant for today's discussion in particular is that good bucket fillers are also very flexible. And I don't mean flexible like flexible in our muscles, but I mean flexible as in psychologically flexible. And flexible in terms of openness to thinking about different ways to fill the buckets. There are many ways to fill each bucket. There's many ways to go about our lives and feel fulfilled in terms of different values. People who are flexible are willing to try different activities that might meet the same values. People who are more rigid or aren't flexible might only know of one way to fulfill themselves, one way to reach those values. Flexible people make their choices based on the extent to which they meet their personal values. Okay, so what does this mean for sport? What are we talking about with values in the context of sport? Well, here's what it is. When we enjoy sports, we often find that the sport we enjoy is filling many buckets for us. Just think broadly. When you're involved in sport, it's good for your physical well-being, your mental well-being, teaches teamwork, you get companionship. There's a sense of purpose. You get to challenge yourself. And there's so many other ways that sports is fulfilling for us. Go back to this list. I looked through this list and I just went through it quickly and said, okay, in general, a person's doing, is playing a sport. What are they getting from it? And I came up with this, which was like 35 or 40 arrows, right? You get to be accountable. There's a sense of achievement. You're contributing to a group effort. You work on your discipline. You can be enthusiastic about something. You work on your leadership skills. You show your strength. You engage in teamwork, right? There's so many values that we get to tap into simultaneously when we're doing sports. In fact, think of it like the buckets. All of these buckets get filled when you show up to practice, when you pursue those goals, when you go out and get the chance to compete. And then we hit something unexpected like we've had in 2020 with the pandemic. And this happens, right? Because we were filling those buckets in this one way that was so valuable to us and so impactful for us. A lot of people have reached out to me over these last 6-9 months to talk about this issue. That sense that those empty buckets not only are empty buckets, but create a sense of emptiness. How do I feel fulfilled? How do I feel motivated? How do I feel interested in the things that make my life better when these buckets feel so empty for me? So let's start shifting into what we do about this challenge. And it's very real, it's very common. Right now, we're at this point of tension between threats and values. The current pandemic is threatening. It threatens our way of life. It threatens our sense of well-being and our ability to access the things that give us a sense of well-being. And it's threatening literally in a life or death way for many people. It also creates this tension with our values because it's pulling us away from the things that allow us to leave that fulfilled life, allow us to pursue those values. So people who are struggling right now often are finding that they're more threat focused than values focused. So what are we talking about here? Well, let's start with this empty table. And down the left, you see 4 different areas where we're responding to what's going on in our world. One is our physiology. Another is our cognitions or our thoughts. The third is our behaviors or how we act. And the fourth is our social engagement. When we face a threat in our lives, we often have what many of you probably know as a fight or flight response. The fight or flight response was designed to help us really survive in the face of a major threat. Our body prepares to fight or to run away. So physically, our body activates, it's ready to move, it's ready to go. Our thoughts focus on the threat and everything else goes away. It's like we get tunnel vision, right? We become very threat focused so that we're putting our resources into the thing that's threatening our well-being. Similarly, our behaviors focus down on the things that protect us, mitigate the threats, self-protection, and we stop doing the other things, right? We put all our resources into responding to the threat. And like a turtle with a shell, a lot of times we find that we pull within ourselves. We isolate from other people. We pull within ourselves for self-protection. In a situation like we have in 2020, we've also kind of been told to do that. We've been told to be physically distant from other people, which has created a certain amount of isolation, even if unintended. So it's probably pretty obvious that what we're really looking for is to help individuals counteract that threat-based response. Our preferred response is to lessen those the fight or flight physiologic response. We want to be able to focus back out from the threat and the current challenge to the present, to doing things that are available to us now, to focusing on things that are available to us now that can add to our life, right? We don't have to be solely threat focused. And we want to be socially engaged. We want to engage with the people around us, our community, that makes our life better. So this is where sport comes back in, right? We can use sport as something that we get to do that's fulfilling, that we can do now, despite the current situation, that can help add to our life. Whereas when everything stopped and we had to move away from practicing and away from competing, we became more threat focused and less attuned to the things that contribute to our values. So let's talk about this idea of using or leveraging sport to promote resilience. What is resilience? Well, that's a great question, actually. We don't have a lot of consistency on what resilience is. It's one of those things where everybody kind of knows what it is, but nobody has great definitions. And so in our field, we have many definitions. I like this one. It's clear, it's concise, it's straightforward. Resilience is the human capacity to persist, bounce back, and flourish when faced with stressors. So we persist, we push on despite the challenge that's facing us. We bounce back if it's knocked us down. Our world kind of stopped this spring. We're figuring out now, how do we bounce back as we move into 2021? And then the really cool thing is flourishing, right? How do we not just get back up, but how do we push forward? How do we make our lives better despite the challenge that we're facing? So if we make this more simple, it's the ability to get back up and be a better version of ourselves, despite the fact that the situation is challenging. So here's where there's opportunity for you, but there's only opportunity if you're taking care of yourself. Think of this like building a house. You have to have a strong foundation. Our foundation, in part, is built on our health, our physical, mental, and social health. So if you're going to get back into sport, you're going to push forward, you're going to make 2021 better than 2020, your world has to be built on improved health. This is a challenging time. Things have been difficult. Therefore, we have to focus enough on self-care. We can't just push on as if life's the same. We got to take care of ourselves. The flip side of that argument, though, is if you're into sports and you're an athlete, a big part of taking care of yourself often comes from training, from playing your sport, from being around the people who share this interest with you. So they go hand in hand, or they have almost what we call a bi-directional relationship where one is impacting the other. So we have to think here about the long game, right? We're already 9 months at this point into this challenge. The point you're listening to this will be even farther down the road. We have to find a rhythm that helps you manage things the best for you. So we may not be able to go about our craft in the way that we always could. We might not be back to full training. We might not be back yet to competition. But what can you restore right now? There's probably things you can do. Some training, some preparation, some personal growth. So where I would challenge you is to tie this back to where we started today. Think about your values. What makes participating in sport meaningful for you? And can you either restore some of what you used to do that you're not doing, or can you find new ways? Remember that flexibility piece? Can you find new ways to tap into the things that are meaningful for you? Do you like sport because of personal improvement? Well, what are all the ways that you can grow as a person? Or do you like it as group based improvement? And if you like it for group based improvement, what are things you can do collectively with your teammates to push forward as a group? Even if you can't be together, can you be creative in working towards shared goals? If you like competition, is it competition with yourself or is it competition with others? I met with a rugby team this spring who was desperately missing competition, and they said they like competing with each other. And at that point, they couldn't do anything sport related, so they decided to have a knitting competition where they were going to knit against each other and see who could come up with the best end product. And these guys I was meeting with didn't have any knitting skill, but it was the idea of creating that sense of between person competition. Again, kind of again with the within person versus between people. Do you like teamwork or do you like individual work? What are things you can do that could be structured around your preferences? So I'm urging you to open up that menu of options. Think about what values are met for you through your participation in sport. Think about where your buckets are empty. Think about where they need to be filled and be creative in starting to refill those buckets. My goal is to see that the athletes I get to work with are in a good position to hit the ground running when things start to get back in order. To be there, those buckets need to be in the process of being filled. You can't start from that point of emptiness. Now, as a psychologist, I also want to say that one of the great ways that you could use extra time you may have right now is to spend more time on mental training. One of the biggest things that we hear from athletes is that they aren't doing mental training because they don't have time for it. Well, now we have more time. There's a lot of ways you can work on mental training. There's sports psychologists you can work with. There's training programs you can go through. But I just wanted to give you a couple here that you could start on your own. There's a lot of research that shows that learning to do mindfulness-based meditation can make you a better athlete. Mindfulness-based meditation is a way that we can improve your focus, your ability to pay attention, your ability to stay engaged with what you're currently doing, your ability to manage distracting or distressing thoughts. There's some great apps that you can actually use to start learning these techniques. I've listed 3 of them here. They can walk you through a curriculum where you can learn these strategies. Mindfulness-based meditation also is helpful on that physiologic response to the fight or flight, response, where it can help to drive down some of those symptoms. If you're interested in reading about sports psychology, there's a bunch of great books. I've read a couple, or I've put a couple of my favorites here on the slide. But if you go on Amazon or another website and you look up sports psychology, you'll see that there's a number of great books, some of which teach specific strategies, others of which just give perspective on how athletes or other leaders in their fields think about and approach the sport or the challenge that's been in front of them. So let's tie this all together. We started by talking about values. Many of us enjoy sports because they're fulfilling across multiple values. They're a great, like one swing of the bat to accomplish a bunch of things. This year, though, has reminded us that when sports are gone, we can feel unfulfilled in so many different ways. So my hope is that you're going to use the lessons that you've learned from this year's experience and from your broader experience in sport to restore that sense of fulfillment, where you start looking at those values and you figure out how to start refilling those buckets, either in the ways you used to or in new ways, so that you feel more fulfilled. And as we closed with, this is a great time to focus on yourself, to focus on things that maybe you've neglected in the past, or to focus on things that you just feel like you haven't had enough time to dive into. This can be a time for personal growth. It's certainly an abnormal time, but there's an opportunity here to help yourself be in the position that you want to be in to hit the ground running in the coming year. I've put my email here. I'm certainly open to answering questions if you have any questions. And otherwise, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this talk. Thank you.